Flip through any radio dial from 1981 and alongside the familiar hits, you'll run into something stranger. A song built around a gimmick or an odd little idea that somehow caught on with millions of listeners before vanishing just as fast. So today, we're counting down 1981, 15 weird hit wonders you didn't know. Number 15, Sweet Baby by Stanley Clarke and George Duke. Stanley Clarke and George Duke were both respected jazz fusion musicians long before they teamed up as the Clarke-Duke Project, and nobody expected their smooth, scat-sung single Sweet Baby to land on mainstream pop radio in 1981. It did anyway, climbing into the Billboard Top 20, an unusual crossover for a track built around slap bass and jazz phrasing, rather than anything resembling a typical pop arrangement. Both musicians went right back to their individual jazz careers afterward, treating the project more as a side venture than a lasting act, which meant the single's unexpected mainstream reach never really got a follow-up. Decades later, it still stands out as one of the more musically sophisticated songs to ever sneak into pop radio rotation, almost by accident. Clarke had already built a reputation through his work with the fusion group Return to Forever, while Duke brought his own background playing alongside Frank Zappa and George Benson-style crossover projects, giving the single a level of instrumental pedigree rarely found on a top 20 pop chart entry. The pairing was originally meant as a low-key studio experiment rather than a serious commercial bid, which makes its unexpected chart run all the more surprising in hindsight. Number 14, Somebody's Knockin' by Terry Gibbs. Terry Gibbs came out of Georgia with a voice built for country radio, and her 1981 single, Somebody's Knockin', became a genuine crossover hit, climbing into the Pop Top 30 while topping the country charts entirely. The song's mix of gospel-tinged imagery and a devil-at-the-door metaphor gave it an odd, almost theatrical quality that set it apart from most of what else was charting in either format that year. Gibbs, who had been blind since childhood, continued recording country music for years afterward, but nothing else she released ever crossed back over into pop the way that single did. The song has quietly become a country radio staple, even as most casual pop listeners from the era have long since forgotten where it originally came from. Gibbs wrote much of her own material and had a rich, gospel-influenced delivery that made her stand out from many of her country contemporaries at the time. And Somebody's Knockin' itself was inspired partly by old spiritual imagery reworked into a playful, almost mischievous narrative. She earned a Grammy nomination for the single and remained a respected performer within country circles for years, even though mainstream pop audiences largely moved on once the song's chart run ended. Number 13, The Land of Make-Believe by Bucks Fizz. Bucks Fizz had already won the Eurovision Song Contest in 1981 with a completely different single. But it was The Land of Make-Believe, released later that same year, that turned into their most enduring and strangest hit, topping the UK charts that November. Underneath its bright, almost childlike melody sat lyrics that many listeners at the time read as a coded commentary on authoritarian politics, an unusually dark undercurrent for a song that sounded, on the surface, like it belonged in a nursery rhyme. The band continued having hits in the UK for a few more years, but this particular single remains the one most listeners outside Britain never encountered, despite it being arguably the oddest thing they ever released. Its unsettling lyrical undertone paired against such a cheerful arrangement is part of why the song has stuck around in British pop culture, long after its chart run ended. Bucks Fizz had formed specifically to compete in Eurovision, and their win with Making Your Mind Up earlier that year had already made them a fixture of British pop, complete with a skirt-tearing choreography gimmick that became one of the contest's most talked-about moments. That instant fame gave The Land of Make-Believe a huge built-in audience upon release, even though its tone was considerably darker and stranger than the group's cheerful Eurovision-winning image might have suggested. Number 12. Sweetheart by Franca and the Knockouts. Franca and the Knockouts formed in New Jersey and scored their only major hit in 1981 with Sweetheart, a driving rock ballad that climbed into the Billboard Top 10 and got heavy radio play throughout the year. Frontman Franca Pravit wrote the song specifically as a showcase for the band's tight harmonies and arena-ready hooks, and for a brief stretch it looked like the group might have a long career ahead of them. Instead, follow-up singles failed to connect, and the band quietly dissolved within a couple of years. Pravit's story didn't end there, though, since he went on to co-write 2 songs for the film Dirty Dancing a few years later, including its biggest single, giving him a strange kind of songwriting afterlife that far outlasted his own band's brief run on the charts. Franca and the Knockouts had built their sound around big, layered vocal arrangements and radio-ready guitar hooks that fit comfortably alongside the arena rock dominating FM radio at the time. And Sweetheart itself was recorded quickly after the label heard early demos and pushed for a fast release. The band toured steadily behind the single's success, but changing tastes and lineup instability kept them from ever recapturing that same commercial momentum again. Number 11. How About Us by Champagne. Champagne was an R&B group out of Illinois, whose slow-burning ballad, How About Us, became a surprise hit in 1981, climbing into the pop top 20 after starting life as little more than an afterthought on their debut album. The song had almost been left off the record entirely, and it wasn't until radio stations started picking it up independently that the label realized they had a genuine hit on their hands. Champagne never matched that success again, though the song itself found a long afterlife, getting sampled and covered by other artists for decades afterward. It remains a quiet favorite on slow jam radio playlists even now, largely disconnected in most listeners' minds from the group that originally recorded it.
If the fire's out, we should both be gone.
Champagne had been a working band for years, before their debut album finally found a label willing to release it, and much of that record leaned toward a funkier, more upbeat sound than the slow ballad that ultimately became their signature. The gap between what the group had actually built their identity around and the tender, stripped-down song that made them famous is part of why so many listeners over the years have struggled to connect the artist's name with the song itself. Number 10. Hooked on Classics by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Few one-hit wonders from this era sound as unlikely as Hooked on Classics, a medley that took snippets of Beethoven, Rossini, and other classical composers, and set them all to a driving disco beat, arranged by conductor Louis Clark and performed by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Released in late 1981, the single became an enormous novelty crossover hit, climbing into the pop top 10 the following year and spawning a whole series of follow-up Hooked on Classics records chasing the same formula. It's a genuinely strange piece of chart history, an actual symphony orchestra landing a dance hit by repurposing centuries-old compositions for the disco floor. None of the sequels ever matched the original success, and today it survives mostly as a curious footnote from a year when almost anything with a strong enough beat could become a hit. Louis Clark, a respected conductor and arranger who had previously worked with the Electric Light Orchestra, built the medley by threading together dozens of recognizable classical passages into a single continuous piece, a technically demanding arrangement task disguised as a lighthearted novelty record. The Royal Philharmonic Orchestra's participation gave the project a level of legitimacy that helped it cross over from a gimmick into something classical radio stations and pop stations alike were willing to play. A rare feat for any record built around music that was, in some cases, over a century old. Number 9. Boy from New York City by the Manhattan Transfer. The Manhattan Transfer had built their reputation on jazz and vocal harmony work well before 1981, But it was their cover of the doo-wop classic Boy from New York City that became their biggest pop crossover moment, climbing into the Billboard Top 10 that year. The choice to revive a nearly 20-year-old song in the middle of the new wave and synth-pop boom felt almost deliberately out of step with the rest of the charts, which is likely part of why it stood out so much at the time. The group continued their career largely within jazz and vocal circles afterward, picking up numerous Grammy Awards over the following decades, but never landed another single anywhere close to this one's mainstream pop reach. For a group built around intricate four-part harmony, having their biggest hit be a retro throwback single remains one of the odder turns in their long career. The original version of Boy from New York City had been recorded by the group The Ad-Libs back in 1965, and reviving it in the middle of 1981's synth-driven pop landscape was as much a statement of the Manhattan Transfer's own musical identity as it was a commercial gamble. It worked well enough to become their only single to crack the pop top 10, even as the rest of their catalog continued exploring far more ambitious vocal jazz territory that never found the same mainstream audience.
Tell us about the boy from New York City. He's really down.
Number 8. Elvira by the Oak Ridge Boys. The Oak Ridge Boys had already built a long, successful career in gospel and country music by the time they recorded Elvira in 1981. Which makes it all the stranger that the song, built around a nonsense vocal hook and a booming bass chant, became their biggest pop crossover hit, reaching the Billboard Top 5. The song had actually been written and recorded years earlier by its songwriter without much success. And the Oak Ridge Boys version, with its deep-voiced bass singer taking center stage on the hook, turned it into something radio simply couldn't ignore. It won them a Grammy and cemented Elvira as one of the most recognizable novelty-adjacent hits of the year, even though the group's actual career remained rooted firmly in country and gospel music, both before and after. Most casual listeners who can still sing the hook today would likely be surprised to learn it came from a veteran gospel quartet, rather than any kind of novelty act. Bass singer Richard Sturban's deep, rumbling delivery on the song's signature chant became so closely associated with the group afterward that it remained a highlight of their live shows for decades. The Oak Ridge Boys had actually been performing together in some form since the 1940s, making them one of the longest-running acts to ever land a fluke pop crossover hit. A strange contrast between the song's goofy reputation and the genuine musical pedigree of the group performing it. Number 7. Genius of Love by Tom Tom Club.
Do you consider fun? That's so fun.
Tom Tom Club came together as a side project for Talking Heads members Tina Weymouth and Chris Frantz, and their 1981 single Genius of Love turned into a much bigger commercial hit than anything the side project's members expected. Built around a bouncy, percussion-heavy groove layered with playful vocal ad-libs, it became a fixture of early hip-hop and R&B sampling in the years that followed, with its instrumental turning up in tracks by numerous other artists throughout the 80s and beyond. Tom Tom Club never repeated that level of mainstream success under their own name, largely because Weymouth and Frantz's primary focus remained with Talking Heads. But the song's afterlife through sampling has kept it circulating in popular music far longer than most other hits from the same year. The track's playful references to other musicians and its loose, party-like energy stood in sharp contrast to the more art rock-leaning material Weymouth and Frantz were making with Talking Heads at the time, giving them a chance to experiment with a lighter, dance-focused sound that ended up reaching a far wider audience than either of them initially expected.
Do you consider fun? That's so fun.
Number 6. Turning Japanese by The Vapors. The Vapors were a British new wave band whose one hit, Turning Japanese, became a fixture on American radio in early 1981, despite lyrics that generated years of debate over what the song was actually about. The band always maintained the lyrics described the disorienting feeling of obsessive heartbreak rather than anything more explicit, though the ambiguity only seemed to fuel the song's notoriety further. Musically, its tight, driving new wave arrangement made it stand out on rock radio at a time when the genre was still finding its footing in the American mainstream. The Vapors broke up not long after, unable to build on the momentum of a single. that, decades later, is still better remembered than the band that actually recorded it. The band had come out of the same wave of British new wave and mod revival acts that produced groups like The Jam, whose bassist Bruce Foxton actually helped produce some of the Vapor's early material. Number 5. Tainted Love by Soft Cell.
Oh, tainted love.
Soft Cell's Tainted Love became one of the defining synth-pop singles of 1981, built around a stark, minimal arrangement, and Mark Allman's theatrical vocal delivery. A combination that turned what had originally been an obscure 1964 soul single into a completely different kind of song. The duo, made up of Allman and Dave Ball, had discovered the original version through the British Northern soul scene, and their reworking turned it into a massive international hit, spending an unusually long stretch on the American charts. Despite the song's enormous success, Soft Cell never landed another single anywhere near that scale in the United States, even as they continued releasing music in the UK for years afterward. The song's dark, obsessive lyrical tone paired with its stripped-down electronic production made it feel genuinely unlike anything else dominating pop radio at the time. The original 1964 version, recorded by soul singer Gloria Jones, had been a minor release that found its real audience years later, within Britain's underground northern soul dance clubs, where rare American soul singles were prized and played on rotation by dedicated collectors.
Oh, tainted love.
Number 4. 8675309 /Jenny by Tommy Tutone. Tommy Tutone's 8675309/Jenny turned an entire phone number into one of the most recognizable hooks of the decade after its release in late 1981, built around the story of a name and number scrawled on a bathroom wall. The gimmick worked almost too well, with people across the country reportedly dialing that exact combination of digits for years afterward, hoping to reach the fictional Jenny. And several real phone number owners with that sequence found themselves fielding prank calls long after the song left the charts. The band never came close to matching that single's success again, and singer Tommy Heath spent much of the following decades watching the song take on a life of its own. Still played constantly at ballparks and parties, despite most fans having no idea who originally recorded it. Real people who happened to be assigned that phone number in cities around the country reported receiving prank calls for years after the song's release, with some eventually having their numbers reassigned entirely just to escape the constant attention. Number 3. Whip It by Devo.
Now whip it into shape. Shape it up.
Devo had already built a cult following through their unusual visual style and satirical concept, before Whip It turned them into a genuine mainstream act in early 1981, climbing into the Billboard Top 20 on the strength of its stiff, mechanical groove, and a music video built around the band's now iconic red Energy Dome hats. The song's lyrics, often misread as literal, were actually intended as an offbeat piece of American motivational satire, though that nuance was mostly lost on radio audiences who just found the track relentlessly catchy. Devo continued making music for years afterward and remained influential within new wave and electronic circles, but nothing else they released ever came close to matching the mainstream reach of this one single. The imagery from that video alone has kept the band culturally present far longer than their commercial chart history alone would suggest. Devo had built their entire artistic identity years earlier around a satirical concept called de-evolution, the idea that society was regressing rather than progressing. And Whip It was written as one small piece of that larger theatrical concept, rather than as a standalone pop single. The band's members had come out of Ohio's art school scene with backgrounds in visual design as much as music, which shows up clearly in how carefully constructed the song's now famous imagery actually was.
Now whip it into shape. Shape it up.
Number 2. Stars on 45 by Stars on 45. Few one-hit wonders from the entire decade are as bizarre in concept as Stars on 45, a Dutch studio production that stitched together sound-alike snippets of numerous Beatles songs into one continuous disco-tempo medley. Released in 1981, the track shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that August, an almost unprecedented achievement for something built entirely around a rapid-fire sequence of borrowed melodic fragments, rather than any original songwriting. The format proved successful enough that the same producers released several follow-up medleys covering other artists, though none matched the reach of the original. Because the entire concept depended on constant reinvention, there was no realistic way to build a lasting career out of it, and the act functioned essentially as a one-time novelty, even by the standards of an era that produced plenty of them. The project had been assembled by Dutch producer Jaap Egermont, who hired session musicians and sound-alike vocalists to recreate the feel of the original recordings, rather than using any actual archival material. A legally careful approach that let the record skirt copyright issues, while still trading heavily on instant listener recognition. Number 1. Mickey by Tony Basil. Tony Basil had already spent years working as a choreographer and dancer in Hollywood, before Mickey turned her into an unlikely pop star in 1981. Built around a cheerleader chant hook and one of the most instantly recognizable music videos of the entire era, the song actually began life in the UK, where it climbed into the top 5 that fall before eventually reaching #1 in the United States the following January, driven heavily by heavy MTV rotation during the network's very first year on air. Basil's background in choreography shaped every part of the song's presentation, from the pom-pom waving visuals to the tightly synchronized dance breaks, giving it a level of visual polish that set it apart from most other singles of the period. She never had another hit anywhere close to that scale, but Mickey alone was enough to make her one of the most recognizable one-hit wonders to come out of the entire decade. Basil had actually choreographed for major films and artists throughout the 1970s before stepping in front of the camera herself, giving her an unusually developed sense of how to build a music video around movement, rather than treating it as an afterthought. The song itself was originally written and recorded a few years earlier by a different artist under a different title, and Basil's version, retooled with its now famous cheerleading concept, is the one that ended up defining the entire decade's idea of a novelty pop hit. That wraps up our countdown of the strangest, most unexpected hit wonders to come out of 1981. Songs built on gimmicks, accidents, and ideas nobody could have predicted would actually work. Some came from artists who never expected to land on pop radio at all, while others came from acts who tried everything they could to repeat the formula and simply never managed it again. Every one of them still holds a strange kind of staying power decades later, whether through a phone number people still dial or a chant still shouted at football games. If any of these brought back a memory, let us know in the comments which one surprised you the most. And if you enjoyed this trip back to 1981, give the video a like and subscribe for more nostalgic countdowns like this one.